Jake's life had turned upside down 3 months ago. His wife of 8 years had packed her bags and left, taking half of everything with her. The house they shared for so long felt too big and too empty, so he moved into a small apartment downtown. The rent was cheap, and that's all he could afford after the divorce settlement. The worst part wasn't the loneliness during the day. Jake kept busy with his graphic design work, meeting clients and finishing projects. But when night came, everything changed. The silence in the apartment felt thick and heavy. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance across the walls from the streetlights outside. Sleep had become his enemy. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind would race with thoughts about what went wrong in his marriage. He tried counting sheep, listening to soft music, even drinking warm milk like his grandmother used to suggest. Nothing worked. The clock on his nightstand seemed to mock him as the hours crawled by. Dr. Williams, his family doctor, had given him sleeping pills after Jake explained his problem. The small white tablets helped sometimes, but they left him feeling groggy. The next morning, Jake didn't like depending on medicine to sleep, but he was desperate. 3 hours of sleep a night wasn't enough for anyone. His work started suffering. Jake found himself making simple mistakes on designs that he could normally finish with his eyes closed. His clients began to notice. One even asked if everything was okay because Jake looked tired all the time. He brushed it off with a smile and blamed it on working too hard. The apartment itself didn't help his mood. It was on the 4th floor of an old building that creaked and groaned throughout the night. The previous tenant had left suddenly, according to the landlord, and the place had been empty for months before Jake moved in. The walls needed paint, and the carpet was worn thin in places, but it was clean, and the price was right. Jake had tried to make it feel like home. He hung some of his artwork on the walls and bought new bed sheets. He even got a small plant for the windowsill, hoping it would make the place feel more alive. But nothing could shake the feeling that he was just passing through, not really living there. On Tuesday night, exhaustion finally caught up with him. Jake had been awake for almost 40 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination to finish a big project for a new client. His eyes burned, and his head felt heavy as he stumbled into the bedroom around 3 in the morning. He didn't even bother changing into pajamas. Jake just kicked off his shoes and fell onto the bed fully clothed. The sleeping pills sat on the nightstand, but he was too tired to reach for them. For once, he felt like sleep might come naturally. The room was dark except for a thin line of light coming from under the bathroom door. Jake always kept that light on because complete darkness made him feel anxious. As his eyes grew heavy, he felt his body finally starting to relax for the first time in weeks. Then something changed. The air in the room felt different, like the moments before a thunderstorm when everything becomes still and electric. Jake's skin began to tingle, and the hair on his arm stood up. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling grew stronger. A presence filled the room. Not just the feeling of someone being there, but something deeper and more unsettling. It was like being watched by unseen eyes. Jake's heart began to beat faster, but his body felt heavy and unable to move. He was caught somewhere between being awake and asleep. When he forced his eyes open, she was there. A woman stood at the foot of his bed, perfectly still and silent. The dim light from the bathroom created shadows that made it hard to see her clearly, but Jake could make out her long dark hair and pale skin. She wasn't wearing any clothes, and there was something about her smile that made his blood run cold. The woman didn't move or speak. She just stood there watching him with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. Her smile was knowing, like she understood secrets about him that he didn't even know himself. Jake tried to move, tried to speak, but his body wouldn't respond. Time seemed to stop. Jake couldn't tell if he was looking at her for seconds or minutes. Every detail burned into his memory. The way her hair fell over her shoulders, the strange confidence in her posture, the way she seemed completely comfortable in his bedroom like she belonged there. Then she moved. Slowly, gracefully, she walked around to the side of the bed. Each step was silent on the old carpet. She reached out one hand toward his face, and Jake could feel warmth radiating from her skin even before she touched him. "You've been waiting. For me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. Jake's mind screamed at him to move, to run, to do something, but his body remained frozen. Her fingers were almost touching his cheek when suddenly his eyes snapped fully open. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The room was empty. Jake sat up quickly, looking around frantically. The bathroom light was still on. His clothes were still on. Everything was exactly as it had been when he laid down. He checked the time. Only 20 minutes had passed since he came to bed. It had to be a dream. The stress and lack of sleep were playing tricks on his mind. Jake got up and checked the front door, still locked. He looked in every room of the small apartment. Nothing was out of place. No sign that anyone had been there. But as he walked back to the bedroom, Jake caught a scent in the air. Something floral and sweet, like perfume. He had never smelled it before, and he definitely didn't own any fragrances. The scent was faint, but definitely there. Jake spent the rest of the night sitting in his living room chair, too shaken to go back to bed. As morning light began to filter through the windows, he convinced himself it had all been a very realistic dream. Stress could do strange things to a person's mind, and he had certainly been under enough stress lately. But deep down, something felt different. The apartment didn't feel quite the same anymore. It was like someone had moved a piece of furniture, just slightly, changing the whole feeling of the space. Jake couldn't shake the memory of those dark eyes and that knowing smile. Most disturbing of all, part of him wondered if he would see her again. Jake spent the next morning questioning everything. He made coffee with shaking hands and sat at his kitchen table, replaying every detail of what he thought he had seen. The rational part of his mind kept insisting it was just a dream. People had vivid dreams all the time, especially when they were stressed and sleep-deprived. But that perfume smell lingered in his bedroom. Even after opening all the windows and running a fan, he could still catch hints of it. Jake had never been around that particular scent before, yet it felt strangely familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. He threw himself into work that day, taking on extra projects and staying busy until his eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. Anything to avoid thinking about the woman at the foot of his bed. His latest client wanted changes to a restaurant logo, and Jake made revision after revision, grateful for the distraction. By evening, exhaustion weighed on him like a heavy blanket. Jake had barely slept in days, and his body was demanding rest. He considered sleeping on the couch, but that seemed silly. He was a grown man, not a child afraid of monsters under the bed. That night, Jake rearranged his bedroom completely. He moved the bed to face the door and repositioned the dresser so nothing could hide behind it. He even bought a small nightlight and plugged it in across the room, adding more light to the space. If his mind was playing tricks on him, maybe changing the environment would help. The sleeping pills sat on his nightstand, but Jake decided against taking them. If he was having strange dreams, maybe the medication was making them worse. He would try to sleep naturally even if it took longer. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Jake began to feel foolish about rearranging the furniture. He slept lightly, waking at every small sound, but saw nothing unusual. Maybe the stress really had been causing hallucinations, and now that he was aware of it, his mind was back to normal. On Saturday night, Jake actually got 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep. He woke up feeling better than he had in weeks. The morning sun streamed through his bedroom window, and for the first time since moving into the apartment, he felt like maybe things would be okay. But Sunday night brought her back. This time, Jake woke up slowly, like rising from deep water. He felt the presence before he saw anything, that same electric feeling in the air. But instead of standing at the foot of the bed, she was sitting on the edge of it, much closer than before. The woman looked exactly as she had before, but somehow more solid, more real. Her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her skin seemed to glow in the dim light. She was turned toward him, watching his face with those same knowing dark eyes. Jake tried to move but found his body heavy and unresponsive again. This paralysis felt different from the first time, though. It wasn't just fear keeping him still. Part of him didn't want to break whatever spell was happening. She reached out slowly and touched his forehead with cool fingers. The touch was gentle, almost caring, but it sent shivers down his spine. Her skin felt completely real, not cold like he might have expected from a dream figure, but warm and soft. "Why do you fight this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you keep running from what you need?" Jake wanted to ask who she was, what she wanted, but no words would come. The woman's fingers moved from his forehead to his hair, running through it slowly. The gesture was intimate in a way that should have terrified him, but instead, he felt an unexpected sense of calm. "You're so tired," she continued, her voice full of understanding. "Tired of being alone, tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not, tired of fighting sleep because you're afraid of what you might see." How could she know these things? Jake had never spoken these thoughts aloud to anyone. Even his doctor didn't know how deeply the loneliness cut into him, or how much he dreaded the quiet hours when there was nothing to distract him from his thoughts. The woman smiled, but it wasn't the unsettling smile from their first meeting. This smile was sad and knowing, like she understood pain that went deeper than words. She leaned closer and Jake could smell that same floral perfume, stronger now. "I know what you need," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "I know because I needed it too." Before Jake could process what she meant, she was gone. Not gradually fading away, but simply not there anymore, like a television being switched off. Jake bolted upright, fully awake and alert. His heart was racing, but not from fear this time. There was something else mixed in, a strange sense of loss, like waking up from a beautiful dream only to find it wasn't real. The room felt empty in a way that went beyond just being alone. Jake got up and walked around the apartment, checking every room. Everything was normal, but the perfume scent was stronger now. It wasn't just in the bedroom anymore, but seemed to drift through the whole apartment like she had been wandering through all the rooms. He found himself looking in mirrors as he passed them, half expecting to see her reflection behind him. The bathroom mirror, the one on his dresser, even the black screen of his television. They all seemed like windows she might appear in. This time, there was physical evidence he couldn't explain away. His hair was messed up on one side, exactly where she had run her fingers through it. The sheets were wrinkled in a way that suggested someone had been sitting there. Most unsettling of all, there was a slight indentation on the mattress where she had been. Jake sat on his couch as dawn broke outside his windows, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. Two encounters couldn't both be dreams, especially when there was physical proof left behind. But if they weren't dreams, what were they? He thought about calling his doctor, but how could he explain this without sounding completely insane? "Doctor, I think a mysterious woman is visiting me at night," sounded like the beginning of a mental health evaluation. Instead, Jake decided to start keeping a journal. He would write down every detail of these encounters, take photos of any evidence, and try to find patterns. If something strange was really happening, he needed to understand it, and if he was losing his mind, at least he would have a record of how it started. But as he sat there making plans to document and analyze these visits, Jake realized something that disturbed him more than the encounters themselves. Deep down, beneath all the confusion and fear, part of him was hoping she would come back again. Jake's journal became his lifeline over the next 2 weeks. Every morning he would write down what happened the night before, no matter how small or strange. He noted the time he went to bed, what he ate for dinner, whether he took sleeping pills, and any dreams or encounters he experienced. The woman appeared 4 more times during those 2 weeks, always when Jake was at his most exhausted. She never stayed long, but each visit felt more real than the last. Sometimes she would just stand and watch him. Other times she would touch his hand or stroke his hair while whispering things he could barely remember when he woke up. Jake started setting up his phone to record video each night, but the recordings showed nothing except him sleeping restlessly. The audio picked up his breathing and occasional mumbled words, but no other voices. Still, when he watched the recordings back, there were moments where he seemed to be reacting to something the camera couldn't see. The lack of video evidence didn't discourage him. Jake had read online about electromagnetic fields and how some people believed spirits could interfere with electronic devices. Maybe that explained why his phone couldn't capture what he was experiencing. Physical evidence was harder to dismiss. Several times Jake woke up to find his bedroom rearranged in small ways. A book moved from the nightstand to the dresser, the curtains tied back when he remembered leaving them closed. Once he found the window open even though he was sure he had locked it before bed. The perfume scent was the most consistent proof. It appeared every time she visited and lingered for hours afterward. Jake even bought several different perfumes from the store, trying to match the smell, but nothing came close. It was unique, floral, but with something deeper underneath, like vanilla mixed with something he couldn't identify. His work was suffering badly. Jake had missed 2 client deadlines and made so many mistakes on a website design that the client almost fired him. He needed help, but he wasn't sure where to turn. Talking to a doctor about mysterious nighttime visitors seemed like a fast track to psychiatric medication. Instead, Jake decided to research his apartment building. If something strange was happening, maybe it had happened before. The building was old, built in the 1960s according to city records, and had housed hundreds of tenants over the decades. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was a friendly older man who had owned the building for 15 years. When Jake stopped by his office with questions about the apartment's history, Peterson seemed happy to talk. Unit 4B? You're not the first tenant to ask about that place, Peterson said, settling back in his chair. Had a couple people move out real quick over the years, never could figure out why. Jake's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Well, there was a young teacher about 5 years ago. Real nice girl, paid her rent on time, never caused trouble. Then one day she came down here looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. Said she had to move out immediately. Wouldn't even explain why. Peterson continued. Then there was a college student 2 years after that. Same thing. Moved in fine, then suddenly packed up in the middle of the night. Left half his stuff behind. What about the tenant right before me? Jake asked. Peterson's expression grew more serious. That's a sad story. Woman named Isabella Cruz. She lived there for about 3 years. Quiet as a mouse, kept to herself mostly. Found her one morning when she didn't answer her door for a welfare check. Jake felt his blood turn cold. Found her? She had passed away in her sleep. Natural causes, the coroner said. But she was only 32. No health problems that anyone knew about. Her sister said Isabella had been depressed about some man who left her, but she seemed to be doing better. The room felt like it was spinning. Jake gripped the arms of his chair to steady himself. What did she look like? Peterson walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of Isabella's rental application with a small photo attached. Jake's heart stopped. The woman in the picture had long dark hair, pale skin, and dark eyes. It was definitely her, the woman who had been visiting his bedroom. You okay, son? You look like you've seen a ghost, Peterson said, then paused at his own words. You're not having problems in that unit, are you? Jake couldn't speak for a moment. His mind was racing with implications. If Isabella had died in his apartment, if her spirit was somehow still there, then he wasn't losing his mind. But that raised even more disturbing questions about what she wanted and why she kept visiting him. I'm fine, Jake lied. Just curious about the building's history. That night, Jake couldn't sleep at all. He sat in his living room chair, staring at the photocopy of Isabella's rental application. Every detail of her face matched his mysterious visitor perfectly. The same eyes that seemed to see through him, the same smile that held secrets. He researched online until sunrise, learning everything he could about Isabella Cruz. She had worked as a librarian at the downtown branch. Her obituary was brief. Survived by a sister in another state, no children, no husband. The cause of death was listed simply as natural causes, with no further details. Jake found her social media profiles, though they hadn't been updated since her death. The photos showed a woman who looked lonely even when smiling. There were very few pictures with other people, mostly just selfies or pictures of books and coffee. Her last post was 3 days before she died. Sometimes I wonder if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. The comment broke Jake's heart. Here was someone who had lived in the same small apartment, probably feeling the same loneliness he felt now. She had died alone, and somehow her spirit was still there, still searching for connection. As the sun rose, Jake made a decision. If Isabella was really visiting him, if her spirit was somehow trapped in that apartment, then tonight, he would try to communicate with her properly. He wouldn't run away or pretend it was a dream. He would find out what she needed and why she had chosen him. But first, he needed to understand more about what had happened to her. Jake called in sick to work and spent the day at the library where Isabella had worked. The other librarians remembered her fondly, but sadly. She was such a sweet person, said Mrs. Chen, who had worked with Isabella for 2 years. Very quiet, very private. She loved helping people find books, especially romance novels. I think she was a romantic at heart. What happened to her toward the end? Jake asked carefully. Mrs. Chen's expression grew sad. She had been dating someone for about a year. Nice man, or so we thought. Then he just disappeared one day, stopped returning her calls, moved away without telling her. Isabella was heartbroken. She took 2 weeks off work, and when she came back, she was different, quieter, sadder. Did she seem sick or anything unusual in her last few weeks? Not sick exactly, but very tired. She would fall asleep at her desk sometimes. And she talked about having strange dreams, though she never went into detail. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Isabella had been experiencing something in those final weeks, something that might be connected to what was happening to him now. As he walked home that evening, Jake realized he was no longer afraid of seeing Isabella again. Instead, he was eager to talk to her, to understand what had happened and what she needed from him. 2 lonely souls had occupied the same small apartment, separated by death but somehow still connected. Tonight, he would find out why. That evening, Jake prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his life. He couldn't believe he was planning to talk to someone who had died 3 years ago, but everything he had learned pointed to one impossible truth. Isabella's spirit was still in that apartment, and she had been reaching out to him. He set up candles around the bedroom, not for any supernatural reason, but because the soft light felt more welcoming than the harsh overhead bulb. Jake wanted Isabella to feel comfortable if she appeared. He also placed a notebook and pen on the nightstand, hoping to write down anything important she might tell him. As midnight approached, Jake sat on the edge of his bed, fully awake and alert. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose. 2 people had lived in this same small space, both dealing with loneliness and heartbreak. Maybe they could help each other somehow. Isabella, he said, softly into the quiet room. I know who you are now. I know what happened to you. If you're here, if you can hear me, I'd like to talk. Nothing happened for several minutes. Jake began to wonder if knowing her identity had somehow broken whatever connection they shared. Maybe the mystery had been part of what allowed her to appear. Then the air grew thick and electric, the way it always did before she came. But this time felt different, stronger somehow. The candle flames flickered, even though there was no breeze in the room. Jake's skin tingled with anticipation. Isabella appeared slowly, like she was stepping through an invisible doorway. But instead of the confident figure he was used to seeing, she looked uncertain, almost shy. Her dark eyes held a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. You know, she said simply, her voice softer than usual. I know, Jake replied. I learned about your life, about what happened to you. I'm sorry you went through so much pain. Isabella moved closer, but carefully, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. Most people would run away if they knew they were talking to someone who died. Maybe I'm not most people, Jake said with a small smile. Besides, I've been talking to you for weeks now. Finding out you're a spirit doesn't change the fact that you've been the only real conversation I've had since my divorce. Something shifted in Isabella's expression, The sadness was still there, but it was joined by something that looked like hope. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot she had occupied during their previous encounters. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" she asked. Jake thought carefully before answering. "At first I was terrified, but then I realized you never tried to hurt me. You were just lonely. And I understand lonely better than most people right now." Isabella nodded slowly. "I was so alone when I died. David had left me, and I felt like I had no one in the world. I went to sleep one night wishing I could just disappear, and when I woke up I had." "But you didn't disappear," Jake said gently. "You're still here." "I don't know why," Isabella admitted. "I should have moved on, found peace or whatever comes next, but I couldn't leave this place. It's like I'm stuck here watching other people live in my space." Jake felt a deep sadness for her. "How many other tenants have you tried to connect with?" "A few," Isabella said, looking down at her hands. "But they all ran away when they saw me. You're the first person who stayed, who tried to understand instead of just being afraid. What do you need, Isabella? What would help you find peace?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I think I just needed someone to know I existed, to know that I mattered. For so long I felt invisible even when I was alive. When David left, it was like proof that I wasn't worth loving or remembering." Jake's heart ached for her. He understood that feeling of being forgotten, of wondering if anyone would notice if you just vanished. His divorce had left him with similar doubts about his own worth. "You matter, Isabella. Your life had meaning, and the way you died doesn't change that. The librarians at your work still remember you fondly. You helped people find books, find stories that made them happy. That's not nothing." Isabella smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her. "Thank you for saying that. I had forgotten about the good parts of my life. But there's something else, isn't there?" Jake could sense there was more she needed to tell him. Isabella's expression grew serious. "Jake, I need you to understand something. The longer I stay connected to this place, the stronger I become, and the more I want to keep you here with me." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been trying to help you sleep, to give you peace, but part of me wants to keep you from waking up at all. The loneliness is so strong that it makes me want to pull you into whatever state I'm in so we can be together forever." Jake felt fear creep back into his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Is that what happened to you? Did someone or something pull you into death when you were vulnerable?" Isabella shook her head. "No, I chose to give up on my own. But now I see how easy it would be to convince someone else to make the same choice. When you're hurting and tired, the idea of just letting go starts to sound peaceful." Jake understood what she was saying. There had been nights recently when he had thought about how much simpler everything would be if he could just stop trying so hard to rebuild his life. The idea of giving up held a certain appeal when everything felt difficult. "But I don't want that," Jake said firmly. "I don't want to give up, and I don't think you really want me to either. I think you want someone to choose to live, to prove that life is worth fighting for even when it's hard." Isabella stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see something changing in her expression. The desperate longing was still there, but it was being replaced by something that looked like resolve. "You're right," she whispered. "I don't want to drag you down with me. I want to see someone choose differently than I did. I want to see someone fight for their life instead of giving up." The room grew brighter somehow, as if Isabella's decision had lifted some invisible weight from the space. Jake felt lighter too, like a burden he didn't know he was carrying had been removed. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Isabella stood up slowly, and Jake could see that she was becoming less solid, more translucent. "Now you choose to live, really live, and I choose to let go of this place and move on to whatever comes next. Will I see you again?" Isabella smiled, and for the first time it was a smile full of peace instead of sadness. "I don't think so. But thank you, Jake. Thank you for seeing me, for listening to me, and for choosing hope over despair." As she faded away, Jake felt a profound sense of loss mixed with relief. The apartment suddenly felt different, lighter, more like a home and less like a prison. For the first time in months, Jake felt truly awake and ready to face whatever came next. Jake slept deeply that night for the first time in months. When he woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through his bedroom window, and the air smelled fresh instead of carrying that lingering floral perfume. The apartment felt different, emptier in some ways, but also more peaceful. He got up and made coffee, moving through his morning routine with more energy than he'd had in weeks. The conversation with Isabella felt like a dream now, but Jake knew it had been real. The candles were still arranged around his bedroom, and his notebook contained several pages of notes he had written down during their talk. Most importantly, something fundamental had changed inside him. The heavy weight of depression that had been pressing down on him since his divorce felt lighter. Not gone completely, but manageable in a way it hadn't been before. Jake realized that helping Isabella find peace had also helped him start to heal. By encouraging her to let go of her pain and move on, he had reminded himself that healing was possible. If someone who had literally died from loneliness could find the strength to choose hope over despair, then surely he could do the same. The first thing Jake did was call his doctor. Not to report supernatural encounters, but to talk honestly about his depression and ask for help. Dr. Williams was understanding and supportive, recommending both counseling and a mild antidepressant that might help Jake sleep better without the grogginess of sleeping pills. Depression after a major life change like divorce is very common, Dr. Williams assured him. The important thing is that you're recognizing it and asking for help. That takes courage. Jake also made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Rodriguez. During their first session, Jake found himself talking more openly about his feelings than he had in years. He couldn't mention Isabella, of course, but he could talk about the loneliness, the sense of failure, and the fear that he might never feel truly connected to another person again. Loneliness can be overwhelming, Dr. Rodriguez said. But it's important to remember that it's a feeling, not a permanent state. Feelings change, especially when we take active steps to address them. The therapist gave Jake homework assignments. That seemed simple but felt challenging after months of isolation. He was supposed to have one meaningful conversation with another person each day, even if it was just chatting with the cashier at the grocery store or calling an old friend. Jake started small. He began saying good morning to his neighbors in the hallway instead of hurrying past with his head down. He struck up conversations with other regulars at the coffee shop near his apartment. These brief interactions reminded him that connecting with people didn't have to be complicated or scary. 2 weeks after his last encounter with Isabella, Jake felt brave enough to call his best friend from college, Ryan. They hadn't spoken since before the divorce, mainly because Jake had been too ashamed to reach out when his marriage was falling apart. "Jake, man, I was wondering when I'd hear from you," Ryan said warmly. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," Jake admitted, "but I'm working on it. I should have called sooner." "Don't worry about it. Divorce is tough stuff. You want to grab dinner sometime this week? I'd love to catch up properly." That dinner led to regular weekly meetings with Ryan, and eventually Jake felt comfortable enough to share some of what he'd been going through. Not the supernatural parts, but the depression, the loneliness, and the struggle to rebuild his life. "You know what I think?" Ryan said one evening over pizza. "I think you've been treating this divorce like it's the end of your story instead of just the end of a chapter. There's still a lot more story left to write." Jake's work life improved as, well, with better sleep and a clearer mind, he was able to focus on his projects again. He even took on some new clients and started working on a personal art project, a series of illustrations about healing and transformation. 1 month after Isabella's final visit, Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible during his darkest days. He signed up for a pottery class at the community center. It was something he had always wanted to try, and it seemed like a good way to meet new people while learning a new skill. The class was small and friendly, filled with people from all walks of life. Jake found himself looking forward to the weekly sessions and the casual conversations that happened while everyone worked with clay. That's where he met Carmen, a nurse who was taking the class to relax after long shifts at the hospital. She had kind eyes and an easy laugh, and Jake found himself genuinely interested in getting to know her better, not because he was desperate for companionship, but because she seemed like someone worth knowing. "It's funny how working with your hands can be so calming," Carmen said during their third class as they both struggled with their pottery wheels. "It forces you to focus on the present moment," Jake replied. "I've been learning that the past and future can be pretty overwhelming if you spend too much time thinking about them." Carmen smiled. "That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way." "Something like that," Jake said, returning her smile. As weeks turned into months, Jake's life took on a rhythm he hadn't experienced in years. He had regular therapy sessions, weekly dinners with Ryan, pottery class, and increasingly frequent coffee dates with Carmen. None of these relationships felt forced or desperate. They grew naturally, built on genuine connection rather than the need to fill an empty space. 6 months after Isabella's final visit, Jake felt ready to move to a new apartment, not because he was running away from memories, but because he had outgrown the small space that had sheltered him during his darkest period. He found a sunny one-bedroom place closer to the pottery studio and his therapist's office. On his last night in the old apartment, Jake sat in his bedroom one final time. The space felt neutral now, just 4 walls and a window. There was no lingering presence, no sense of sadness or unfinished business. "Thank you, Isabella," he said quietly to the empty room. "Thank you for showing me that it's possible to choose hope, even when everything feels hopeless. I hope you found the peace you were looking for." A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, though Jake was sure he had closed the window. He smiled and took it as Isabella's way of saying goodbye. Jake packed the last of his belongings and prepared to move forward into whatever came next. He had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending pain never happened. It was about choosing to keep living despite the pain, trusting that better days would come, and remaining open to the connections that make life worth living. The next morning, as Jake carried boxes to his new apartment with Ryan and Carmen's help, he felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year: genuine excitement about the future. He didn't know exactly what that future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, he was eager to find out. Isabella had taught him that some stories end in tragedy, but others end in transformation. Jake was determined to write the kind of story that Isabella never got the chance to live, one where love, connection, and hope ultimately triumph over loneliness and despair.